In the heart of Ogbra, a quiet Nigerian village nestled by the thick palms and winding rivers, the sounds of the dawn chorus were greeted with whispers of the past. The villagers lived in harmony with the land, where the traditions of their ancestors guided every action. Chief Odigon, an esteemed elder, ruled over the people with a firm but just hand. His compound stood at the village's center, surrounded by lush farmlands and the bustling markets where women traded goods in vibrant attire. Among the villagers, a man named Olumide, tall and strong like the ancient Iroko trees, was admired for his dedication to his family and his position as the village's best hunter. His wife, Abike, a soft-spoken and graceful woman, was known for her wisdom and kindness. Together, they had 2 children, Odeola, the bright-eyed daughter who carried her mother's compassion, and little Koyede, a mischievous but lovable boy of 7. However, not all was well beneath the surface of Olumide's perfect family. The village knew of Olumide's many conquests, whispered secrets behind closed doors. Despite Abike's devotion, Olumide's wandering heart often strayed to the village women. He had grown cold toward Abike, his affections misplaced, sowing seeds of discord in his home. One woman, in particular, caught Olumide's attention, the captivating and mysterious Osime, a widow who had recently moved to the village. Osime's presence was a subject of debate among the villagers. Her beauty was undeniable, but her ways were unconventional, setting tongues wagging. She had an air of aloofness that both intrigued and unsettled the men, while the women eyed her with a mix of envy and caution. Osime had no interest in the idle chatter of the market women, her focus lay elsewhere. She was determined to make a life for herself in this village. But her ambitions stretched beyond mere survival. She wanted power, influence, and the attention of the most respected man in Ogbura, Olumide. Olumide, blind to the chaos he would unleash, found himself drawn deeper into Osime's web. Their secret meetings at the riverbank, away from the eyes of the village, became more frequent, and with each encounter, Osime's hold on him grew stronger. Olumide became a shadow of the man he once was, consumed by lust and deception. He neglected his family, leaving Abike to manage the household alone, her heart heavy with suspicion. Abike noticed the shift. Olumide's once tender words had become harsh, his eyes distant. Though she hadn't yet confronted him, the tension in their home was palpable. Even little Koyede, in his innocence, sensed something amiss. Odeola, wise beyond her years, watched her father with sadness, her mother's silent tears tearing at her heart. And so, the first cracks appeared in the foundation of Olumide's once stable life. In a village where the ancestors' eyes were ever watchful, the consequences of betrayal were never far behind. Word spread slowly through the village like a breeze, too quiet to stir, yet present in the air. Abike could no longer ignore the rumors that trickled into her ears. It wasn't just gossip anymore, her husband's infidelity was spoken of in hushed tones by the village women who pitied her, though they never dared to say it to her face. Each morning as she went to the well, the looks of sympathy weighed on her like stones. Despite the ache in her heart, Abike carried herself with grace. She knew the weight of the family name and would not allow shame to darken it further. Yet, the pain was unbearable. The love she once shared with Olumide had faded into a cold distance. She found herself often kneeling before the small shrine in their home, praying to the ancestors for guidance. As weeks passed, the distance between them grew wider, and soon Olumide stopped coming home altogether, opting instead to stay at Osime's hut. The villagers saw Olumide's folly, shaking their heads as the once proud hunter became a shadow of his former self. But Osime was no ordinary woman. She had her own secrets, her own reasons for pulling Olumide into her arms, though none in the village could see the depth of her schemes. Abike's children suffered too. Odeola, now a young woman, bore the weight of her mother's heartache and silently despised her father for it. She had once idolized Olumide, following him around the compound as a child, eager to learn the ways of the world. But now, all she could see was his betrayal. She swore never to trust any man again, lest she suffer the same fate as her mother. Little Koyede, on the other hand, missed his father dearly. Too young to understand the complexities of the adult world, he would ask, "Mama, where is Papa? Why does he stay away?" Each question was like a dagger to Abike's heart, but she masked her sorrow with a gentle smile, telling him, "Your father is busy with work, my son. He will return soon." The village, ever watchful, whispered of Osime's wickedness, but no one dared to confront her. Olumide's fall from grace was not just a personal tragedy, it was a lesson, a warning to those who thought they could defy the order of things without consequence. And so, as the sun set over Ogbra, casting long shadows over the land, Abike made a decision. She would not let her family crumble into ruin. She would confront the woman who had stolen her husband, no matter the cost. The day of reckoning came on an afternoon when the sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the red earth of Ogbra. Abike, with her heart pounding but her step steady, made her way to Osime's compound. She had tried to ignore it for too long, but the time had come to confront the woman who had lured her husband away. In her hand, she carried a small, woven basket, an offering of peace, though her heart raged with anything but. As she approached Osime's modest hut, her chest tightened. The village children playing in the distance paused their games to watch. Abike's presence alone was enough to draw attention, and the sight of her approaching Osime's home was a spectacle no one wished to miss. Word traveled fast, and soon a few of the older women gathered at the edges of the scene, whispering in low tones, their faces a mixture of anticipation and concern. Osime stepped out of her home just as Abike arrived, her face calm and composed. She was as beautiful as ever, her skin glowing in the fading sunlight, her eyes sharp and piercing. She looked at Abike without a trace of guilt, standing tall as if she had every right to claim what was not hers. Abike set the basket down carefully at Osime's feet, a symbolic gesture, one of humility. But her voice, when she spoke, was firm. "Osime, I did not come here to fight or to cause a scene. I have come as a woman, a mother, and a wife who wishes to save her family. You know what you have done. I ask you, leave my husband. Let him return to his home." Osime's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "You think it is that simple, Abike? That because you come here with your head bowed and a basket of food, I will just walk away? Your husband made his choice. If he wanted to stay in your home, he would be there. He is here because he wants to be." The words stung like venom, but Abike stood her ground. "You are mistaken if you believe this will end well for you. The ancestors see all, and a home built on deceit will not stand." Osime let out a cold laugh, stepping forward. "Your ancestors are not my concern. Olumide chose me. It is you who must accept that your marriage is already broken." Abike felt a wave of anger rising within her. Her calm demeanor threatened to crack, but she remembered her children, her family's name, and her dignity. "The bond of marriage is sacred, Osime. It is not just between two people, but blessed by the ancestors and the gods. If you continue on this path, you will bring nothing but misfortune upon yourself." Osime's face hardened at the mention of the ancestors. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You speak of sacred bonds, Abike, but what of the bond between man and woman when love is gone? You say the gods will punish me, but they punish you too, for your blindness, your weakness in holding on to something that has already slipped away." At that moment, Olumide emerged from the hut, his eyes clouded with guilt and confusion. He looked from Abike to Osime, as if caught between two worlds. His strong frame seemed smaller, weighed down by the burden of his betrayal. "Abike, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Abike looked at him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. I came to remind you of who you are, Olumide. To remind you of the family you are abandoning. Osime, sensing the shift in Olumide's demeanor, grabbed his arm. You don't have to listen to this, Olumide. You are free to make your own choices. But Olumide's gaze remained fixed on Abike, guilt flooding his heart. The woman before him, the woman he had married, the mother of his children, stood with such grace despite the pain he had caused her. He saw the strength in her eyes, the depth of her love, and the realization hit him like a blow. He had wronged her in ways words could not repair. Abike, sensing that her presence had begun to chip away at the wall Osime had built around him, made her final plea. Come home, Olumide. For the sake of our children, for the sake of the life we built together. Olumide's face contorted with inner conflict, but he didn't move. Osime's grip on his arm tightened, and her eyes bore into his, as if daring him to choose. Olumide, Abike whispered. A silence fell over the compound, thick with tension. The villagers, watching from afar, held their breath. Then, as if the weight of his actions became too much to bear, Olumide turned to Osime and gently pulled his arm from her grasp. Without a word, he walked toward Abike, his eyes downcast, filled with remorse. Osime's eyes flared with rage. You think you can just walk away from me, Olumide? You think you can undo what's been done? Olumide didn't respond. He took Abike's hand, and together, they left the compound, walking in silence toward their home. But the bitterness in Osime's heart would not be silenced so easily. Osime stood frozen as Olumide and Abike disappeared into the distance. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, rage, humiliation, and something darker. She had thought herself untouchable, confident that Olumide's devotion to her would last. Yet, in the face of Abike's silent strength, Olumide had crumbled, slipping from her grasp like sand through her fingers. The villagers, sensing the rising storm, dispersed quickly, not wanting to be caught in the middle of what they feared would come next. Osime's presence in Ogbra had always been unsettling, but now she was no longer a mere widow stirring trouble. She had been scorned, and there was nothing more dangerous than a woman with a heart filled with vengeance. She retreated into her home, slamming the door behind her. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Osime paced back and forth, her mind racing for a way to restore her pride. She could not let Olumide slip away so easily, not after all she had done to bind him to her. But it wasn't just about him anymore, it was about her place in this village. The women would sneer, the men would avert their eyes, and she would be left with nothing but the shame of being rejected. As the evening deepened, Osime sat by her fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. Her thoughts grew darker. There had been whispers, stories she had overheard from the old women in the marketplace, about ways to reclaim what had been lost, ways that were not spoken of in polite company. Osime had always dismissed such tales, but now, with her pride shattered, she considered them carefully. She knew of a powerful woman who lived deep in the forest, a woman known for her mystical knowledge, feared by many and visited by few. Some called her a witch, others a healer, but one thing was certain, she had the power to change fates. Osime made her decision. If Olumide would not return to her willingly, she would find a way to make him hers again, no matter the cost. The next morning, as the sun rose over Ogbra, casting its warm light over the village, Osime slipped away quietly. No one saw her leave, her dark figure blending into the early morning shadows. She walked with purpose, her feet carrying her toward the forest edge. The journey ahead was long, but Osime was determined. Hours later, after passing through thick undergrowth and avoiding the curious eyes of animals that watched from the shadows, Osime arrived at the small clearing where the woman was said to live. The air here was different, thicker, almost oppressive. A small, dilapidated hut sat in the middle of the clearing, and from within, the faint sound of chanting could be heard. Osime approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been one to believe in magic, but desperation had driven her to this place. She knocked on the door, her hand trembling slightly. The chanting stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, the door creaked open, revealing an old woman with eyes like dark, bottomless pools. Her face was lined with age, her skin as wrinkled as the bark of an ancient tree. She said nothing, simply watching Osime with a knowing gaze. "I've come for help," Osime said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. The old woman stepped aside, gesturing for Osime to enter. The inside of the hut was dimly lit, filled with the scent of burning herbs. Strange objects hung from the ceiling, animal bones, feathers, and other items Osime could not identify. A small fire crackled in the center of the room. "What is it you seek?" the old woman asked in a voice as soft as the wind, yet filled with an unsettling power. "I want my husband back," Osime replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "He has returned to his wife, but he belongs to me." The old woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "You ask for something dangerous. To take what is not freely given will bring suffering. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Osime hesitated for only a moment. "I am," she said firmly. "I will not lose him." The old woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. There is a way, but it requires a sacrifice. The heart of a woman who wishes to take another's place is a powerful force, but it must be bound to something greater." Osime's heart raced. "What do I need to do?" The old woman turned and began to gather items from the shelves, small vials filled with strange liquids, bundles of dried herbs, and a large, polished stone. She placed them carefully in front of Osime. "Tonight, when the moon is high, you will mix these ingredients and speak the words I give you. But remember, once you begin, there is no turning back. What you desire will come to pass, but the cost will be greater than you can imagine." Osime nodded, her mind too focused on her goal to consider the warning fully. She left the hut with the items clutched in her hands, the old woman's words echoing in her mind. The path she had chosen was set. That night, as the moon hung full and bright in the sky, Osime performed the ritual. She followed the old woman's instructions to the letter, her voice trembling as she spoke the ancient incantations. The air around her seemed to thicken, and for a moment, she felt a strange presence, something dark, something powerful. When it was over, she collapsed to the ground, exhausted but filled with a strange sense of triumph. She had done it. Olumide would be hers once again. But as Osime lay there, catching her breath, a distant rumble of thunder echoed in the sky, and the wind began to pick up, howling through the trees. The village of Obra, sleeping peacefully under the stars, had no idea that a storm, both physical and spiritual, was on its way. Hey there. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We've got a lot more exciting stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss out. Thanks for watching. Now let's get back to the action. The winds howled through Obra like a wild animal, shaking the rooftops and bending the palm trees under their fury. The villagers awoke to the sound of shutters banging and dust swirling in the air. It was unusual for such a storm to come without warning, and the elders exchanged uneasy glances. In a village where tradition ruled and the ancestors' favor was sought in all things, this storm felt like more than just nature's wrath. Inside the compound, Abike stirred from her restless sleep. The night had been strange. She had dreamt of dark figures lurking at the edges of the village, their whispers carried on the wind. She awoke with a sense of dread, her heart heavy in her chest. Olumide lay beside her, his face peaceful in sleep, but Abike could not shake the feeling that something was coming. The air outside crackled with energy as the storm intensified. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the red earth into thick mud. The villagers huddled inside their homes, praying to the gods for protection. In the distance, the sound of thunder rolled across the sky like the drums of an unseen war. At Osime's hut, the storm felt like a living thing, swirling around her small home with a force that shook the walls. She sat by the window, watching the chaos unfold outside with a strange smile playing on her lips. The ritual had worked, she could feel it in the very air. Olumide would return to her, and this time, he would not leave. The storm was only the beginning. But as the wind screamed louder, Osime began to feel a chill creeping into her bones. The darkness she had called upon was not content with a simple task. It wanted more. The old woman's warning rang in her ears, but she pushed it aside, refusing to believe that she had made a mistake. No, she had done what she needed to do. This was merely the price of power. Back at the heart of the village, Olumide awoke with a start. His dreams had been filled with flashes of light and shadow, visions of his family being torn apart by forces he couldn't control. He sat up, rubbing his temples as a deep sense of unease settled over him. He glanced at Abike, who was sitting upright, staring at the door as if she sensed the same danger. "I feel something, Olumide," she whispered, her voice shaky. "It's not just the storm. Something is wrong." Olumide didn't respond at first. The guilt he had carried since his return weighed heavy on his heart, but there was something more now. He felt a pull, a dark presence that seemed to be reaching for him from beyond the storm. He stood up and paced the room, his mind racing. Could this be a punishment for his betrayal? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed outside their home, and the door burst open, slamming against the wall. The wind rushed in, filling the room with a cold, damp chill. Abike gasped and rushed to close the door, but as she did, she saw something out of the corner of her eye, an eerie figure standing at the edge of the compound, barely visible in the rain. "Olumide, look," she cried, pointing toward the figure. Olumide squinted through the downpour, and his heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the rain, was Osime. Her hair was wild, her clothes drenched, and her eyes, those sharp, piercing eyes, glowed with a strange light. "Osime," Olumide whispered, frozen in place. Abike felt the surge of betrayal flood her veins again. What is she doing here? But before Olumide could answer, Osime stepped forward, her voice cutting through the storm like a knife. "Olumide, you cannot escape me. I have made sure of that." Olumide's stomach dropped as the realization hit him. Osime had done something unnatural. His legs felt heavy, like he was being pulled toward her against his will. He took a step forward, then another, as if in a trance. "No." Abike grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "You cannot go to her. You must fight this." Olumide's mind swirled with confusion and dread. He wanted to stay, but Osime's pull was too strong. I don't know if I can," he muttered, his voice strained. Abike's heart raced as she realized the depth of what had been done. Osime had invoked something darker than jealousy. This was witchcraft. "You can fight it, Olumide. You are stronger than this." But Osime's voice called out again, louder this time, as the storm raged. "Olumide, come to me. You belong to me now." With a sudden burst of strength, Olumide broke free from Abike's grip and staggered toward the door. Abike screamed, her hands reaching for him, but it was as if an invisible force was dragging him toward Osime. "No!" Abike shouted, running after him into the rain. As Olumide reached Osime, he fell to his knees, his body trembling with fear and exhaustion. Osime knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are mine now," she whispered, her voice laced with triumph. But as she spoke those words, a bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene for a brief moment. The force of it knocked them both backward, and for the first time, fear flickered in Osime's eyes. She had unleashed something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. The storm reached a fever pitch, and a great roar echoed through the sky, as though the ancestors themselves were enraged by the events that had transpired. The storm soared overhead, its fury growing stronger by the second, as though the very heavens had been provoked. The villagers of Ogbara cowered in their homes, huddling together in fear as the wind howled and lightning flashed across the sky. But at the edge of the village, near Osime's compound, something far more sinister was unfolding. Olumide lay on the ground, his body shaking with a force beyond his control. Osime stood over him, her once confident expression now clouded with uncertainty. The ritual she had performed had unleashed a power she hadn't fully understood, and now that power was demanding a price. The air around them crackled with energy, and Osime felt a chill deeper than the cold wind cutting through her skin. Abike, drenched by the rain, stood frozen at the edge of the scene, her heart pounding as she watched in horror. She could feel the presence of something ancient, something angry. It was as though the ancestors themselves had been stirred by Osime's actions, and their wrath was not easily quieted. From the sky came a deafening roar, like the bellow of a great beast, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Osime stumbled backward, her eyes wide with fear. For the first time, she realized the depth of the mistake she had made. This was no longer about Olumide, it was about the balance she had upset by invoking dark forces for selfish gain. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene once more, and in that brief moment, Abike saw something extraordinary. Figures, ghostly and ethereal, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. Their eyes burned with the light of the ancestors, and their presence was overwhelming, filling the space with a deep, resonant power. Osime saw them too. She backed away slowly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I didn't mean for this," she whispered, as though the ancestors could be reasoned with. "I only wanted what was mine." But the ancestors did not speak. Instead, the air around Osime seemed to grow heavy, pressing down on her as if the very atmosphere was judging her. The wind roared louder, and the rain fell harder, soaking her to the bone. Her body trembled, not from the cold, but from the terror that now gripped her soul. Olumide, still on his knees, looked up at the sky, his face contorted with guilt and fear. He could feel the presence of the ancestors too, and he knew that they had come not just for Osime, but for him as well. His betrayal, his weakness, had led them all to this moment, and the weight of his choices pressed down on him like a crushing stone. Abike stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "Great ancestors," she called out, her voice carried by the wind, "I beg you, show mercy. Do not punish us for the actions of one." The ancestors' presence seemed to shift, as though they were now focusing on her. Abike could feel their gaze, ancient and wise, weighing her words. She knew that the ancestors did not easily forgive, but she had to try. "I am not without fault," Abike continued, her voice growing steadier. "I allowed pride to blind me, and I lost sight of the love and loyalty that should have bound our family. But I ask for your forgiveness. Spare Olumide, and let us make amends." Osime, who had fallen to her knees, stared at Abike in disbelief. "You beg for mercy," she spat. "After everything he has done." Abike looked at Osime, her expression filled with sorrow rather than anger. "It is not just about what he has done, Osime. It is about what you have done as well. You upset the balance, and now we all pay the price." Osime's face twisted with rage. "I was trying to take what was rightfully mine. He was mine." Abike shook her head slowly. "No, Osime. He was never yours. You took what did not belong to you, and now the ancestors have come to set things right." Osime screamed in frustration, her fist pounding the ground. "I will not be punished for this. I won't." But her voice was drowned out by the roar of the storm, and the ancestors' presence grew even stronger. Osime's body began to tremble violently, and she collapsed onto the muddy ground, writhing as though something unseen was staring at her from within. Olumide, still on his knees, wept openly. He had never believed in the power of the ancestors as strongly as others in the village, but now he knew their wrath was real. His betrayal had not only hurt his wife and his family, but it had also torn at the very fabric of their village's harmony. He had lost his way, and now, it seemed, the cost would be greater than he could bear. Just as it seemed the storm would tear the village apart, the roar of the wind began to die down. The lightning ceased, and the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. The figures of the ancestors remained, watching silently, their presence still powerful but no longer overwhelming. Abike stepped forward again, this time toward Olumide. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You must ask for forgiveness," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. Olumide nodded, his heart heavy with regret. "Great ancestors," he began, his voice trembling, "I have wronged my family, and I have betrayed the vows that bind us. I see now the pain I have caused, and I ask for your mercy. I will make amends. I will restore what has been broken." The ancestors did not respond in words, but the air around them seemed to grow lighter, as if the weight of their judgment was slowly lifting. Osime, lying on the ground, could feel the same shift. She struggled to her feet, her body weak and trembling. "What about me?" she called out, her voice barely audible. "Will you not forgive me as well?" The ancestors' presence seemed to shift again, focusing on Osime. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft breeze passed through the clearing, and Osime collapsed once again. This time, she did not rise. The weight of her actions had broken her, and the ancestors' silence was the only answer she would receive. As the storm finally subsided, the villagers slowly emerged from their homes, unsure of what had transpired. But those who had witnessed the events would speak of the night the ancestors came to Ogbra, and how their wrath brought both destruction and redemption. The next morning dawned with an eerie stillness over the village of Ogbra. The once fierce storm had left behind a village soaked in silence, broken only by the sound of water dripping from the roofs of the homes. The villagers gathered in small groups, murmuring in hushed tones about the strange events of the previous night. They spoke of the storm that came without warning, the dark forces that seemed to grip the village, and the haunting presence of the ancestors. Olumide and Abike sat outside their compound, their faces weary from the night's ordeal. The weight of what had happened still pressed heavily on Olumide's shoulders, but there was also a glimmer of hope in his heart. The ancestors had shown mercy, enough, at least, to give him the chance to make things right. Will they come back? Abike asked quietly, her eyes gazing out at the wet earth as though the ancestors' shadows still lingered there. Olumide sighed deeply. "I don't know. But I do know that I have been given a second chance, and I will not waste it." He reached for her hand, and for the first time in months, Abike didn't pull away. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth. "You hurt me, Olumide," she whispered, her voice heavy with the pain she had been carrying. "You broke us." Olumide closed his eyes, feeling the sharp sting of her words. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to heal that wound. I was a fool. I lost sight of what truly mattered, and I let pride and temptation lead me astray." Abike remained silent, letting the weight of his words sink in. She wanted to forgive him, but the pain of his betrayal still sat like a stone in her heart. Trust, once broken, was not easily restored. Yet, the events of the night had stirred something within her, a sense that, despite the hurt, there was still a path forward. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Abike admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Olumide nodded slowly. "I understand. But I will be here, waiting, until you can. I will prove to you that I am worthy of your forgiveness." They sat together in silence for a long time, the tension between them slowly easing as the morning sun began to dry the soaked earth. Meanwhile, in the depths of the village, Osime lay in the quiet of her home, her body weak and her spirit shattered. The storm had taken something from her, something she couldn't quite understand. The ancestors had not spoken, but their judgment had been clear. She had sought to bend the world to her will, to claim something that was never hers to begin with, and the darkness she had called upon had left her broken. Her once sharp and calculating mind now felt dulled, her body limp as if the very life had been drained from her. The village women, always wary of her, had avoided her hut since the storm. Osime knew why. They feared her, and now, perhaps, pitied her. As she stared blankly at the ceiling, she thought of the choices that had led her here. Her hunger for power, her desire to possess Olumide, and her inability to accept that some things were not meant to be. The ancestors had offered her no forgiveness, and Osime knew she would carry the weight of her actions for the rest of her days. Yet, even in her broken state, there was a faint whisper of regret that gnawed at her heart. Could she, too, seek redemption? Was there a way for her to mend what had been torn apart? The darkness had consumed her, but the storm had passed, and in the stillness of the aftermath, Osime felt a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or the distant echo of remorse. In the weeks that followed, Ogbora slowly returned to normal. The villagers spoke of the night the ancestors came with a mixture of awe and fear, but as the days passed, the storm became less of a curse and more of a tale, a warning to those who might seek to upset the delicate balance of life. Olumide worked tirelessly to restore his place in his family. He spent his days helping Abike with their children, mending the small things he had once overlooked. He was quiet now, more reflective, his mind constantly aware of how close he had come to losing everything. Abike, too, began to soften. Though the hurt remained, she saw the changes in her husband. He was not the same man who had walked away from her months ago. But healing was a slow process. It would take time for the wounds to fully close, and Olumide knew he could not rush that. He would wait, as long as it took, for Abike's heart to trust him again. As for Osime, she remained an outsider in the village. Though the villagers no longer whispered about her with fear, there was an air of pity around her now. She had been powerful once, a woman who could command the attention of any man she desired. But that power had come at a cost, and now, she lived a life of quiet isolation. One day, as the sun set over Ogbra, casting long shadows across the village, Osime ventured out for the first time since the storm. She walked slowly, her steps tentative, as though she were learning how to move through the world. Her once proud and defiant posture was now bent, her face drawn with the weight of her mistakes. She did not speak to anyone as she passed through the village, but she could feel the eyes of the people on her. Some looked away, others watched with curiosity. But no one approached her, and Osime understood why. She was no longer the powerful widow who had held the village in her grip. She was something else now, something humbled by forces far greater than herself. As she reached the edge of the village, she paused for a moment, gazing out at the vast, open fields beyond. The wind, now gentle and warm, brushed against her face, and for the first time in a long time, Osime felt the stirrings of a new beginning. The seasons changed in Ogbra, and with them came a sense of renewal. The storm had passed, but the lessons it brought with it remained woven into the lives of those it touched. The village moved forward cautiously, aware that the balance of life was fragile, and that the ancestors watched closely. Olumide continued on his long road to redemption, working every day to rebuild the trust he had shattered with Abike. His heart was filled with humility, and he no longer sought to prove himself with grand gestures or empty promises. Instead, he let his actions speak, day after day, as he nurtured his family, cared for their home, and honored the traditions he had once neglected. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the village, Olumide sat under the shade of the great Iroko tree at the center of the village square. His children played nearby, their laughter filling the air as they chased each other, free of the weight that had once hung over their home. Abike approached quietly, carrying a woven basket of vegetables she had gathered from their garden. She sat beside him, her movements slow and thoughtful. They shared a moment of silence, watching their children play. The air between them had grown easier, more familiar, though there was still a distance that had yet to fully close. "I have been thinking," Abike began, her voice soft but clear. "About everything that happened. About us." Olumide looked at her, his heart quickening. He had waited for this moment, unsure if it would ever come. "And," he asked gently. Abike paused, choosing her words carefully. "I have seen how hard you've been trying, how much you've changed. And though the hurt remains, I think I am ready to forgive you." Her voice faltered for a moment, then strengthened. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It will take time for us to heal completely." Olumide nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I understand, Abike. I will wait as long as it takes." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I believe you this time. The ancestors gave us a second chance, and I think we should honor that by moving forward together." A sense of relief washed over Olumide. He hadn't realized how heavy the weight of guilt had been until it began to lift. He reached for her hand, holding it gently, as they sat together in the golden light of the setting sun. As the village of Ogbora began to heal, so too did its people. The elders spoke of the storm as a warning, a reminder that life was a delicate balance of respect, honor, and humility. The younger generation listened more closely to the stories of the ancestors, understanding that the past held the key to the future. And the village learned to tread carefully, respecting the forces that governed their world. But what of Osime? Osime had become a shadow of the woman she once was. The fire in her eyes had dimmed, and she now lived in quiet solitude at the edge of the village. The power she had once craved had come at a terrible price, and though she still felt its presence within her, it no longer ruled her. The ancestors had left their mark on her soul, and she knew she could never return to the life she once had. She spent her days tending to her small garden, speaking little to the villagers who passed by her home. Sometimes, children would sneak a glance at her through the bushes, their eyes wide with curiosity, for they had heard the stories of the widow who had angered the ancestors. One day, as Osime walked in her garden, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Abike standing at the edge of the path, her expression calm but watchful. Osime straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. "What brings you here?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. Abike hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. "I came to speak with you." Osime raised an eyebrow, surprised by the visit. She had expected Abike to hate her for what she had done, for the pain she had caused. "You have nothing to say to me," she said bitterly. "I am no longer a part of your world." Abike shook her head slowly. "That is not true. You are still part of this village, whether you like it or not. And I have come to offer you something." Osime's eyes narrowed. "What could you possibly offer me?" Abike took a deep breath, her voice steady. "Forgiveness." Osime blinked in shock, her heart racing. "Forgiveness," she repeated, as though the word was foreign to her. "Yes," Abike said firmly. "The ancestors have already passed their judgment on you. But I believe in second chances. You made a terrible mistake, Osime, but so did Olumide. And if I can forgive him, I can find it in my heart to forgive you as well." Osime stared at Abike, disbelief and guilt warring within her. She had never expected forgiveness, least of all from the woman she had wronged so deeply. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she whispered, her voice breaking. Abike's eyes softened. "Perhaps not. But forgiveness is not about what you deserve. It is about what we choose to give. The storm has passed, Osime. It is time for all of us to heal. Osime felt a tear slip down her cheek, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to cry. She wept for the mistake she had made, for the darkness she had embraced, and for the life she had destroyed in her pursuit of power. And as the tears fell, she felt something else, something lighter. It was as though the burden of her guilt had begun to lift, just as the storm had lifted from the village. Abike stepped forward, placing a hand on Osime's shoulder. "You are still part of this village," she repeated. "And you can still find a place here, if you choose to." Osime nodded, her voice too choked with emotion to speak. In that moment, she realized that the path to redemption was not close to her. It would be long and difficult, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope for her future. As the months passed, Osime began to slowly reintegrate herself into the village. She worked hard to atone for her past, helping wherever she could, and though the villagers were slow to trust her again, they could see the change in her. The fire of ambition that had once burned so brightly in her eyes had been replaced by humility and a quiet strength. Olumide and Abike continued to rebuild their family, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Though the scars of their past remained, they had learned to honor the lessons of the storm, the lessons of forgiveness, humility, and the power of redemption. And so, life in Ogbra went on, guided by the wisdom of the ancestors and the resilience of its people. The storm had come and gone, but its legacy remained, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the possibility of a new beginning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. We really appreciate your support, and we'll see you in the next episode.